Hi guys, welcome to plants general reproduction, and we're also going to cover part of the structure which we did not get to cover in the last video, which is plants tissues. So today we're going to talk very generally about plant reproduction, and what I mean by very generally is that plants actually have different reproductive strategies depending on the type, the phylum, and the type of plants that there are. So I'm gonna give you a general overview of what the reproduction is, and then when we look at each of the different types of plants, we're gonna be more specifically discussing each of those types of plants. It is really important that you understand the basics before before we do the other lessons, because it is going to get a little bit more complex. So it is important that you understand these basic concepts really well. Make sure you have a place where you're taking notes. If you're drawing the cycle of reproduction, if you're taking notes by paper, I recommend that you know how to draw this cycle. So make sure you need to have all the materials to do that. If you don't have them ready, please pause this video now and go grab those materials so that you can be successful completing this video. Okay, before we start talking about plant reproduction and the tissue structure, I'm going to give you a quick review from the last lesson. So go ahead and answer these questions to the best of your ability, and then I will go over the answers. So, what type of roots are better at finding deep water sources? What type of stems are found in longer living plant species? The spines of a cactus are modified what? And the plant roots grow toward the water. This is an example of what type of response? You can pause the video now, answer these questions, and then turn the video on so that you can see the responses. Okay, so remember that tap roots are able to finding deep water sources because they're one long root that go all the way down. Woody stems, remember that herbaceous stems that are green, they're able to photosynthesize, but those are typically plants that only last one season. They're called annuals. Remember that the spines of cacti are just modified leaves to protect the plant, and that when the plant roots go toward the water is the stimulus, and so the plant is growing toward the stimulus, which means that it's a tropic response. And it's because it is going in the same direction to where that stimulus is positive. Okay, so we are going to start by talking now about the types of tissues. So remember at the beginning of the year, we have cells. We talked about the organization of cells. So cells, a bunch of cells working together, they form tissues, and these cells, basically, they're in charge of a specific function. So we are now going to talk about what those functions are for plants. So the first type of tissue that you're going to find in plants is called meristematic. Meristematic tissue contains stem cells. Remember, stem cells are cells that can be programmed or made for any type of function. So the meristematic tissue, basically what it does, it allows to make new cells, to develop those cells to grow whatever you want. Usually, you are going to find meristematic cells in new growth. So you see here the root of this plant here. If this whole area, it's new, so these would all be meristematic cells because they are brand new cells that were formed to develop this tissue. The next type of tissue that you would find is dermal. So look what it says, dermal, outer layer of cells. So the dermal tissue is like the shield or the protective layer. In humans, it would be the skin of the plant. And so you see these little beaded, this little beaded wall here. That is the plant's dermal tissue. Is the outer part of the tissue, and this picture gives you a good representation of what the plant would look like. So see, it has an outer tissue called the dermal tissue, and then it has this built-in tissue in the middle, and then you have the vascular tissue, which remember not all plants have. And that's what we're going to go to next. So far, meristematic and dermal tissue can be found in any plants. The next type of tissue is vascular, and vascular can only be found in vascular plants. Remember, vascular plants are more developed in terms of the evolution because they're plants that are larger and have to transport nutrients. Now, the vascular plant has two areas. We discussed this, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail. The xylem transports water, and notice that, or we talked about that water gets transported from the root up to be developed to the rest of the plant. So think of xylem as a one-way road. It's going in one direction, so it's a one-way street, so it can only go up. The phloem transports sugar and other types of nutrients. The phloem, however, can actually transport in both directions. Now, this is important to know because remember, we talked about the leaves of the plant being the ones that produce photosynthesis for the majority of the plants. Now, the leaves are typically at the top of the plant, so they would typically go down. However, you can have some situation that if the plant needs sugar in the higher portion of the plant, and that leaf doesn't have sugar at that moment in time, other leaves can provide sugar to it by sending it up. Or in some plants, sometimes the stem, right? We talked about the stem being able to photosynthesize if it's green. And so in that scenario, the root can actually, provide sugar either up or down. So depending on where the sugar needs are, the plant can either send it up or send it down. But the xylem, the water, can only come in one direction because the roots are in charge of providing the water. Okay, the next type of tissue is called ground tissue, and it's basically everything else, all the other leftover tissues. So it's whatever else is not meristematic, dermal, or vascular is ground, and all plants have ground tissue. Okay, we're going to start in reproduction now. So reproduction, there's two types of reproduction. What is vegetative reproduction? So the two types, as you can imagine, just like fungi, there is sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So vegetative reproduction is asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is when the plant is able to grow from a existing plant. So notice here there's a strawberry plant here, and a little plant comes from this plant and develops roots and grows on its own. Now, if this were cut off, if this plant was cut off right now, this little baby, it's an identical copy of this plant, this little baby would be fine. It's developed a root system, is able to do that. So this would be asexual reproduction. It's the exact same copy of this plant. Sometimes, I don't know if you guys have ever tried this, but you can cut like a piece of a plant and then put it on water and it develops a root system. That's what vegetative reproduction is. Now notice here it says it's natural or directed. Natural is made by nature like this, and directed is made by humans. So it's like when you cut the plant yourself, that is called directed vegetative reproduction. If it's naturally happening in the environment, it's natural vegetative reproduction, and it makes a clone because it's asexual reproduction. It makes a clone genetically of the plant. Now let's talk about sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction in plants is very interesting and a little bit long, so hang in there while you should be drawing this, and you're going to be pausing this video here at multiple stages to draw this. So notice it's called alternation of generations. And if you remember fungi had haploid and diploid cells. Just like that, plants will have haploid and diploid cells. So remember, humans only have diploid for us to function. Our only haploid cells are sexual. Plants, on the other hand, go through two stages of life: their haploid stage and their diploid stage. So sometimes plants are haploid and sometimes they're diploid. Now, depending on the type of the plant and its conditions, it may have a very short haploid and a very long diploid, or the other way around, or it may be even. That's the detail that we're going to go to in the other once we look at each different types of plants. So for now, I'm going to talk about the general process of plants. And what you need to know is that plants are found they go through life stages just like humans, but their life stages are two, called haploid and diploid. So to start, the zygote, remember the zygote is basically the diploid, and it's created from an egg or a sperm. I'm sorry, not from or. An egg and a sperm comes together and then it fertilizes to make a zygote. Now this zygote goes through mitosis. It divides and divides and divides and divides. And now you have, just like fungi, you have a whole bunch of zygotes that have now divided through the process of mitosis. So the zygote has the same, all of these zygotes have the same genetic information. That's called sporophytes. Okay. Now, during this once you have all these zygotes, they're going to divide. And in this division, they're going to have now a genetic variability. But look what happens. They're going to divide in the process of meiosis. So they're going to end up with half of the genetic information. So once the zygote divides to mitosis, it creates a bunch of adult sporophytes. And the haploid, because of meiosis, it divides the genetic material, and now the diploid has become haploid spores. Now, look at this. You have two paths. These haploid spores can either be female or male, right? Because they're only, you now divided the genetic material, they're only going to be able to have one sex. And if you are male, some of these spores are going to go over here, and then they're going to start copying themselves and copying themselves and copying themselves, making a whole bunch of basically, the corresponding sperm. So these are called male gametophytes. And if it makes eggs, then it would be female gametophytes. So it'll be spores that will become female gametophytes, spores that will become male gametophytes. And as you probably guessed, then these male and female gametophytes will then come together again and fuse, and we will go back to making a diploid zygote. Remember, at this stage where they make gametes, these could be eggs and sperm from different species, not different species, same species, but different types of plants. So it could be like the plant that is like 10 feet away from this plant. So this is where more genetic variability can be added. If you get an egg, this is what happens with the birds and the bees, for example. When you have flowers, that the eggs and the sperm will mix. It can mix through air. There's different ways of transportation of these gametophytes. If you think of gametophytes, think of them like spores, right? Because that's what they are. They're spores with one specific sex that will be transported either water, air, or through a insect to then mix with other gametophytes to make a fertilized zygote. And that fertilized zygote would then now start the process over. Okay, remember to answer your questions for the video, and see you guys soon.